good afternoon and welcome to episode 60 of the Leading IT podcast. Today we're going to analyse the CrowdStrike outage and we've got Empyrean lead, cyber lead David Stevenson with us, and we're going to talk about what happened, the ramifications, and what are some next steps that people in IT leadership can and should take. Our podcast, if you're new, is for Australian IT leaders who are looking to stay up to date with the latest news, trends in AI, cybersecurity, cloud and infrastructure, strategy and leadership. And your hosts are Tom Layden, who's the CIO at Longview, myself, Josh Rubens, CEO at consulting firm Empyrean, and we look to tackle the fast-changing IT landscape from both sides of the client-vendor paradigm with pragmatic and actionable advice. So, g'day guys. Dave, welcome. I think you're the first guest we've had back. Actually, maybe the second.
Honoured nonetheless.
Oh, well, it's good to have you. Tom, how are you going?
Mate, I'm good. Luckily, we weren't scathed by Friday's events, but I know plenty of people who had to work throughout the night, on the weekend, into Monday. We'll talk about that in more detail shortly.
Yes, yeah. And you've been able to stay warm in fantastic Melbourne weather.
It only gets better from here, right, Josh?
Yeah, it can't get
any worse, right?
No, definitely can't get any worse. All right, so Dave, we're going to bring you into the news. So we're going to keep this episode very, very cybersecurity centric, given it's been all AI all the time for quite a while. And if AI is what you're looking for, don't worry. The next episode, we are looking to talk about Copilot-enabled business processes and automation. So we'll get back on that train. But I think, Tom, this incident was big enough to change our strategy for today.
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of people have talked about it, but I think what we're going to do is really understand, just, I guess, reflect and take some time to go through it in a bit of detail and then work out what the hell we would do to avoid this kind of disaster, catastrophe again, right?
Yeah, and what should we do? And yes, I think hopefully we'll have some pragmatic and actionable advice for IT leaders out there on what they could do. We'll get into the news. So the first bit of news was that the Microsoft Intra Suite was made generally available this month. These solutions, they were announced last year, but they're now actually GA. And I think it's important because they're a key component of a zero trust strategy. So They are Microsoft's Secure Service Edge solution. So Secure Service Edge is a bit of a subset of SASE, a Secure Access Service Edge solution. So it's all cloud-based. These services are all delivered out of the cloud. That includes things like secure web gateways, zero trust network access, CASB, and firewall as a service. So to date, the sort of main vendors have been people like Zscaler, Netscope, and Cloudflare. And now Microsoft's really, as they do, they're sort of fast followers. They come in with something that'll be nicely integrated with everything else and bundled in, at a price point that'll be very attractive for most enterprises. So, just quickly before we get some commentary. So what is now GA is what's called Intra Private Access. So this is a zero trust network access to on-prem applications and resources. So this would allow you to replace a legacy VPN solution. So if somewhere, we've got users working everywhere and we need to, protect their access. So one of them is accessing on-prem and legacy VPNs. There's infrastructure costs, etc. So now they're providing this called private access solution. And the other one is called Entra Internet Access. So this is for securing access from anywhere to SaaS applications and the internet. So this is the Zscaler alternative. So it's really, giving you, between these two and all the other Microsoft stuff, it's really giving you, secure access from anywhere to any application on-prem, in the cloud, all delivered as a cloud service.
Right. So you don't need physical devices for any of this stuff. It's all via cloud, all connected into the Microsoft platform, as you say. So can people now rip up all their legacy devices in their server comms rooms around the country. Is that what you're saying, Josh?
Pretty much. I mean, if
Getting to that point.
if they had some VPN appliances, they could. Dave, did you want to comment on those two? There were a couple of other bits that I think were useful, but those are the two main ones. Did you want to comment on the ecosystem and your
the big
thoughts on
change
these?
here for a lot of organizations is traditionally you go and buy your enterprise grade firewalls, and when you're sitting behind them, you're incredibly protected. In the modern age, we're primarily a work from home or hybrid working environment. So it's more when users leave that ecosystem, they're no longer as protected as what they were behind your $500,000 firewall build. So by introducing Entra Internet Access, you can start doing sort of that software gateway at the endpoint, protecting users, but also protecting them at the identity level.
Yep.
So if we've got a whole raft of applications that are SaaSified, we can really specify that these users can access them, those users can't access them at that identity level within Entra ID. And it's the same as when we're looking at Entra Private Access. It's very similar to, we can dial into a VPN, but once we're dialed on that VPN, we've primarily got access to everything that's exposed to the VPN itself. With Entra Private Access, again, we focus on the identity itself.
Yep.
And we'll say, Tom, you do need access to this internal system where I don't need access to it. But I might need access to, say, our knowledge base where you won't need access to that. It also gives us and sort of replaces the always-on VPN technology as well. So I'm not looking to dial in. I open up my laptop. We're checking the posture to make sure that I'm secure. And I've just got access to those resources. So the end user experience goes through the roof as well.
Yeah, and also it's not like once you're in, you have access all the time. It's continually checking your posture. So it's continuous, which is one of the principles of Zero Trust. It's continually verifying and assuming breach, using AI and ML to continue watch you. So if you move to another location or to an insecure network, so it's providing that sort of ongoing verification. Other parts were something called Entra ID governance. So this is a governance solution that automates the identity and access lifecycle. So from when a user joins an organization, they're going to have access to certain things. But if you change roles or or when you're leaving, so this solution will automate that whole process, which would be, that would be, the bane of many IT departments, or that, Tom's moved to this role and now he needs access. So a lot of manual stuff. So whereas you can, through ID governance, I think you create groups, Dave, and then once, you move into a different group, your access will, change based on the group that you move into.
Yep. Exactly. I think there's been a trend in the industry sort of over the last 2 to 3 years of putting the power back into HR's hands. Yep. So as they start changing where your profile sits within the organization, the ID governance is going to make sure that you've got the right required access, and then removing access where you no longer require it, depending on the position in the company that you are.
Yeah, so this is an automation. It does use things like Power Automate and Logic Apps and things like that. And the other one was ID protection, which is an ongoing identity. It's a managed identity service, so it's verifying your identity, all the time. And there's another one called Verified ID. It's very confusing, these names, which I think they've released something called Face Check.
Face Check, right?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Instead of scanning your driver's license to validate your identity, you can now prove your identity by scanning with Windows Hello for Business ultimately. And that will verify back to Microsoft that you are who you say you are. So when you're using third-party systems, you can identify who you are. So really good for sort of the know your customer-based clients, but is going into those advanced enterprise features at that stage.
So what does all this cost? I hear you say, Tom, this sounds expensive.
I didn't even want to ask. It's like,
well, funnily enough, it's not that bad.
Ah, really?
No, it's not. So, okay, so you can get the whole suite with all the products for $12 US a user a month.
Right, so for internal users, right? So this is for internal use. So you wouldn't use it for your external user client base at this point.
I'm glad you asked that. It's like we prepared. So they've also there's also another product called Intra External ID,
Ooh,
which
this
is
is
where
very
you can.
relevant, Josh.
Yes, thank you.
You've been looking at my emails or something. What's going on?
I have. We do provide you support, so you know that we know what you're after. So this allows you to secure external identities like customers, partners,
Yes.
business, guests, and consumers. Its core offering is free for the first 50,000 monthly active users.
Really?
So it's
50,000?
basically, yeah. Yeah, so if you have less than that, you're not paying. So the prerequisite is you need to have Entra P1. Mm-hmm. So P1 is included in Business Premium, which I know you have, Tom, or if you have E3, so you already have P1. So that's a licensing and a technical prereq, and then you can buy add-ons. So you can get all these products for $12 US a month, or you can buy them standalone. And the two key ones, the private access and the internet access, are $5 US a user a month. So if at $1.50, it's about $7.50 for each service individually. And if you're interested in some of the others, they're slightly different costs. So it's pretty good. So it's come out. I don't know how that compares, Dave, to the Zscalers and Cloudflares and the others on the market. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so if we're looking at private access, it's very competitive, especially that there's no minimum user purchasing as well. So very competitive against, the Netscopes and the Zscalers of the world. Cloudflare is a very similar price range. So realistically, you're then looking at feature versus feature.
Right.
And to keep everything within the Microsoft ecosystem to make sure you're using your conditional access policies that are already deployed and really leaning into sort of Intune and Defender from that standpoint. I think, Entra Private Access is going to be more of the competitive option from that front. When we're looking at internet access or Entra Internet Access, it's pretty much cheaper than most products on the market. So if we're looking at things like Proofpoint, we're looking again at Zscaler, Netscope. Realistically, it's coming under a lot of those products from that price point as well.
And all nicely integrated. So, so I think it's pretty big that Microsoft, that's now GA. I think, the Microsoft are continually becoming more, relevant in the cybersecurity space. So I think what's good for clients is the ability to consolidate vendors, right? Rather than having, 30 or 40 different vendors and the cost and complexity is the ability to
it's an interesting point, though, right? The consolidation versus vendor distribution. Maybe we need to take that on a different podcast, but
yeah,
some people feel like they really need different vendors in the mix, and maybe the CrowdStrike incident is pro or against that, depending on where you sit, right? But for people who go, there is an advantage of consolidating and saving cash and complexity. There's definitely an advantage around that, but you need to weigh that up with that vendor diversity discussion.
Yes. Yeah. There's got to be a balance. You can't have, I'm going to have best of breed of everything, and I'm going to have 50 different products, and it's going to cost me. There's a balance. There's definitely a balance there. The second bit of news was more of a bit of interest. Is I noticed that Wiz, a cybersecurity firm, has been around for 4 years, knocked back a $35 billion offer from Alphabet, Google's parent company.
But just tear it up.
No, excuse me.
I don't want your money.
I don't want $35 billion. These are 4 blokes. They started the company in 2020. I have to say, I started in 2020. So anyone came to me with, 35 billion. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Tom. I'd be out the door. But, that's a lot of cash. So they're going down the IPO route. I just thought that was... So they're the fastest growing software company in history. They went from 1 million run rate to 100 million run rate in 18 months.
Wow.
So if you look at these guys, they're Mossad's 8200 that cybersecurity team. They had a business that was acquired by Microsoft for many millions of dollars. So they were at Microsoft. They set up the Azure security team there, and they left Microsoft and started this business in 2020. Dave, I don't know if you've had a look at the product. I don't know. All I know is it's basically a cloud security / posture management solution. So
exactly it. And I think used it multiple times. The main life for it is it's cross-tenancy, cross-cloud. Yeah. So it's giving you one portal to manage all of your cloud infrastructure and really leaning into that cybersecurity cloud posture management for you as well. It's kind of nice to see that they have pulled out and they're going to remain as an independent product. But at the same time, it's eye watering money. With you, Josh, I would have taken it.
Dave, would Wiz, if you had Wiz and you got in Wiz, would that have helped you with CrowdStrike problems?
I don't think so.
Really?
No.
People are saying
CrowdStrike
would have helped, but you reckon no, wouldn't have helped?
No, not necessarily. I think, if you're not really.
I don't think so.
So different.
I'll explain to you, Tom, what it does. So basically, it's agentless scanning across all your cloud resources. So whether it's PaaS, IaaS, containers, serverless, so looking at all your data. So that's really good. So that's one of the differentiators. You don't need to install anything, and then it scans your data across public buckets, databases, data volumes, and then it has a nice graph which shows all the interdependencies, pathways, and then it has cloud detection and incident response as well to any issues that are going on in your environment. So in your cloud environment, so it wouldn't have helped your Windows endpoints, Tom. I think is what.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
so
it wouldn't have helped your Windows endpoints. Yeah,
it's positioning yourself as an independent view of security. You've got all these things going on, but Wiz, and there's a few others like this. Here's your one pane of glass, so a holistic view of your data and your systems.
But it's very cloud native. So if you were a company that was very public cloud centric, using cloud native applications, doing a lot of DevOps, Wiz would be what you could look at. And interesting enough, they've got 40% of the Fortune 100 already on board. So it's incredible. So customer, so Morgan Stanley, BMW, Salesforce, Colgate, Blackstone. So these guys have smashed it. It's hard to imagine that within 4 years that you could already be turning down
so
that
large.
money.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what their strategy is. We can talk about that in another podcast.
Yes. So, all right. So that was the news. It was definitely not a new, outside the CrowdStrike thing. It's definitely not a lot happening. It was a struggle to find. But let's get into the CrowdStrike incident. So I'll just do a little bit of I'll sort of preamble, and then Dave, we can get into the tech. So it's called the largest IT outage in history. So July 19th. So a single update, software update from CrowdStrike, it impacted airlines, banks, retailers. So if you went into Woolies or Coles, you saw it. It was really in your face. Flight cancellations, cargo. So this was, as big as you could want. So Dave, tell us what actually, from a technical point of view, what actually happened here.
Yeah, so I guess ultimately it's been chalked up as a mistake that CrowdStrike have pushed an update out to their agent that's known as the Falcon sensor. So, we often talk about Microsoft Defender as an EDR platform, so extended detect and response or endpoint detect and response. CrowdStrike have their Windows version known as the Falcon sensor. So it's continuously receiving updates from the CrowdStrike team. So more so to make sure that, they're picking up any new indicators of exposure and that their scanning agent can then address any of those new indicators. It's picked up an update. That update has then caused a kernel panic within the Windows environment. So the kernel being kind of the heart and brain of your Windows operating system. And that's led into a blue screen of death. So I think, most people will be very familiar with them, sadly. But essentially, your computer's going from operational to no longer operational. You're presented with a blue screen, and at which stage you have to restart the computer. The issue being, as the computer's restarting, it then gets stuck into another blue screen. Microsoft posted on their blog as they were sort of live feeding information coming through. Some people are finding that if you turn it off and on 15 times in a row, it might start up. And we same thing. You keep turning it off and on, you'd eventually get past it and get into the operating system. Alternative to that, the remediation actions were quite heavy and required a lot of effort to go through and remediate the endpoints.
Yeah, there was a lot of manual. So it was reboot in safe mode, delete a particular file entry, reboot, and if the device wasn't on the network, then the user had to literally bring it in. So
exactly.
That's a pain. That's a pain in the ass. So CrowdStrike have said, by the way, their share price dropped 15% on Monday, and SentinelOne's went up 11% on the same day. Well, it's not good because I actually have CrowdStrike shares, Tom, and quite a decent position. So they've, although I will say, go on. Sorry, Tom.
I was going to say, can we just talk about the actual incident in a bit of detail as well? Because it's frankly, it's frightening, right? It's I think 8.5 million machines. Is that right?
1% of Windows compute.
8.5 million, and they were impacted. I think the release went out, whatever, sort of in the middle of the night US time. Within an hour of that release, but going out, it was impacting New Zealand, Australia during business hours. Like from the moment that someone pressed a button of the release to the impact occurring across the globe, that time frame was absolutely frightening from my mind. That was a really scary takeaway. And yes, there was a fix kind of, what was about 2 hours later? Is that right? They had a fix.
Hour and a half later. Had actually pulled the update about an hour and 15 minutes after pushing it out. So they had already reverted back. Yeah. The issue is the nature of how CrowdStrike updates that had already been deployed within that time frame.
And then the other aspect of this thing was that the CrowdStrike device hit the kernel, as you said, and that hit right at the core of Windows operating system, not just Windows laptops and PCs, but servers as well, right? So potentially, and I know people had the situation, your phone was saying servers are out, Windows machines are out, we're toast.
Yeah.
So people are faced with that reality.
Yeah, and the issue is that there's nothing you could do at your end because it was all, these are things that get pushed out. And, because in 2009, the EU forced Microsoft to give third-party ISVs kernel access because they said it was an anti-competitive. By the way, Apple and Linux and Red Hat have said get stuffed to the EU, but Microsoft, given, it's more of an enterprise organization, has enterprise software, was probably more, responsive to, all the governments in Europe. There'll be a lot of software at risk there. So they've given third-party ISVs access, which is why Macs and, Linux machines and servers weren't impacted. Microsoft was impacted. So, there's not a lot at that time. I mean, we'll talk about what you can do moving forward to prevent it. But at the time, it's basically a vendor's pushing out an update, which they need to do regularly in response to the changing, cybersecurity landscape. And it's hitting straight into you, in the kernel of the Windows operating system and just taking you out. Yeah.
Taking you out, right? So for someone who's in control of their network or is charged by the organisation to be in control of your network, you had no control over this incident.
Exactly.
And that, I think that strikes fear into a lot of people who listen to this show, or we know, who is responsible for making sure this never, ever happens.
Well, I saw something already. So there's basically four key issues that are fundamental to our industry and, the ecosystem. Firstly, that we're giving ISVs direct access to the kernel, which removes the operating system vendor from the trust value chain. So the trust value chain is simply the ISV and the customer. Secondly, the silent updates that are coming out. So it means you're 100% reliant on the QA process of the ISV. So that's the other one. And then, the third point is what are the checks and balances for the ISV? So what's how accountable can you hold CrowdStrike? And then, we've got the fragile, it's called human-centric Windows stack, unlike the modern network-centric Unix and Linux OSs that, essentially cannot deal with this. So those are, I suppose, the bigger issues that, it's maybe worth having a conversation about. If you think about China wasn't impacted. China, they don't give a stuff about Microsoft. They use their own technology. There wouldn't have been any CrowdStrike, I think. So there is some sort of, those geopolitical considerations as well. So, Dave, Tom, what are your thoughts on some of those?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is, and maybe Dave, you jump in.
Yeah, look, It's kind of interesting from the kernel perspective as well. Of Microsoft has had so many things in the past that have been able to get to kernel level, and it's been around for early 2000s. We were getting a lot of viruses and a lot of malware that were getting direct to the kernel at that stage. It sort of makes sense from the ISV point of view. They're building upon an architecture that's been around since the dawn of time that hasn't really changed its security principles as well. So, it's the good and bad. From an ISV point of view, you kind of want CrowdStrike to be able to watch the kernel to make sure that they're protecting you at the layer that's going to be attacked. But at the same time, is it more time for Microsoft to really re-architect that system and sort of move more towards how Mac has privacy first and sort of start protecting you from more of that landscape? And, it's a big change. It'd be interesting to see how this would affect the new sort of Microsoft ARM operating system as well. Because again, that's a bit more of a re-architecture away from the x86 architecture.
Yep. Yeah. Look, I think the other issue here is the way they roll it out, right? So I really struggle with this idea that they just press a button and it goes straight out. Surely it should be going out through a process, and I've noticed that CrowdStrike have announced that they're going to test the releases now through a process. Thank you for doing that. Something we were hoping you were doing already.
Yes. Well, they've said today they're implementing additional validation checks to its content validator. Well, they've used the word validation many times for rapid response content with new check process currently in place. So, what would you expect? I mean, quick. Do we think CrowdStrike are going to survive? Are they going to survive this? Can they survive this?
We'll know soon enough. It's George Kurtz has been brought in front of Congress, so I think that's going to really dictate the outcome of a lot of things at the moment. From their share prices, we saw the dip. It's recovered a little bit, but I think it's a lot of people just buying the dip ultimately. So,
well, I mean, let's face it though, you're not going to be able to. It's very hard to sue them directly, right? So if your business is out and you're going, right, lost revenue, who am I going to sue? It's actually quite hard.
Well, can you? I mean, can you though? My concern is that as a CrowdStrike, I will state we are. We're not a big CrowdStrike partner. We don't sell a lot. I will say that as a caveat up front. We are a partner, but we don't do a lot. We don't do a lot with them. So
it's very hard, right? Maybe.
I mean, they're going to be in court. They're going to be tied up in court cases for a long time. I don't see how they can escape. And there's so many big customers and big entities. There's going to be government ports. They're going to be taken. I can't see how they're going to survive that.
Well, that's right. And I think so. Okay, so you can't go direct, but you go in cyber insurance. So you look at your cyber insurance and you get money back. Well, guess what? The cyber insurance people do? They want their money back from CrowdStrike. So I think CrowdStrike are going to be tied up in this for a long time. So, but ultimately, these companies are all about reputation, aren't they? They're all about reputation. If they can't keep you safe, why the hell have you got them? That's their job. That's their one job, is to keep you safe. Not for hackers, but from also their own internal processes. So it'd be very hard to go up to your board and say, hey, guys, we're going CrowdStrike. It's a very difficult conversation. Yeah. If you said, hey, we're moving to CrowdStrike, we're going with these other mobile, we're going with Microsoft, that's a much easier conversation.
So let's talk through scenarios, Dave. So let's say you're a CrowdStrike customer. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah, so I guess it still comes back to looking at what functions and needs you have with CrowdStrike. I think, a lot of people who go CrowdStrike are going Falcon Complete. They're getting the MDR solution and all of the bells and whistles that CrowdStrike sell. If you're looking to move away from CrowdStrike, or, if you're already evaluating products and now CrowdStrike's off the table, realistically, their biggest competitor is going to be someone like SentinelOne. They've got all of much the same offering. They've got the MDR service. They've got the tools that they're directly managing. So you're going to get everything that you need to get just pretty much through their competitor. Alternatively, you do have Palo Alto up there as well that are going to be able to do a very similar aspect, but not necessarily at the price point for the mid to enterprise up sort of market. Most definitely not in the SMB space as well.
Palo is good to be. And the other option is to go Defender, but you need Microsoft don't do the SOC SIEM, the SOC point of view. the managed detection response. So for us, we would do Defender with someone like Arctic Wolf who provide that managed SOC team, and I think together you get a very good solution there. So I think so if you're with CrowdStrike, you can look at those options. I have read that somewhere that customers should consider as a strategy moving forward. Would you have multi-vendor? So would you maybe have one vendor for your servers, one vendor for your endpoints, or if one vendor for your IoT? What do you think, Dave? Mixing your vendors a bit.
Yeah, look, in the enterprise market, happy days. Again, a lot of these big players in the industry are going to have minimum seats that you need to buy. So if you've only got, say, 50 servers but 2,000 endpoints, realistically, you'd have to put CrowdStrike on the endpoints and then go with a different vendor for your server infrastructure, because CrowdStrike wouldn't. Other vendors aren't necessarily going to be able to service the 50 endpoints at the enterprise scale.
Right.
Someone like SentinelOne, again, they will take the sort of SMB mid-tier clients as well. So then they're going to be able to do, say, 50% or 50 endpoint servers, and then 2,000 you'd send over to someone like CrowdStrike. It kind of comes down to how many panels of glass do you want to manage, where do you want to manage your policies. So having everything in that one portal does make sense to, you want to make sure that you've got consistency across your policies, working cross vendor platforms. You can get a bit washed out when you're dealing with sort of that type of architecture.
But I suppose if you're talking to a port or a bank, they would probably do it. I mean, if you're a normal 300 user mid-market architecture firm or whatever, you probably would just go one vendor and you go somewhere else.
Exactly.
But if you're big enough and ugly enough, then you that would probably be a suitable strategy, I would think.
Yeah.
It's down to the risk you're addressing, right? And the risk here is, well, what if my vendor stuffs up? What are they going to take out everything? So I need to address that risk by having multiple vendors in the mix. And then I need to work out what components, what part of my infrastructure are going to have that multi-vendor strategy, what parts will just have the standard structure. But I think this issue that occurred will open people's eyes up to, actually, there is a vendor-related risk here that I need to have a strategy around. And is multi-vendor the right answer? And if it is, what does that blend of multi-vendor look like? Is it 90% this guy and 10% that guy? Is it 50-50? And then what the hell does that mean from a staffing operations point of view? Do I need people in both camps? Have I got screens everywhere? As you see, these systems, they don't talk to each other on purpose. How do I
that's another good point, Tom, that you're making, is you've got to have your, what sort of incident response and business continuity plans have you got? Do you have them?
Yep.
Are they documented? Do you practice them? I would say most places wouldn't. And was something like this in anyone's incident recovery plan? It probably would. I could say it wouldn't have been. But now it probably, because it's not, you wouldn't. I don't know if it hasn't happened before, Dave. I think McAfee or someone had a stuff up a while ago. I don't know if it was this bad.
It happened to CrowdStrike within the Linux environments very similarly about 2 months ago.
Oh, okay.
So Debian was having issues with CrowdStrike, and they had to roll back an update for the Debian OS as well. Right. So not really the first time that it's happened with CrowdStrike. Outside of that, it's sort of not the first time we've seen it. We have seen it with other vendors. Even VMware tools has caused VMs to no longer start as well on certain patches. I think the big thing here is it's just sort of, again, 1% of the Windows fleet across the world, 8.5 million endpoints. Even if we look at things like WannaCry and NotPetya, this actually impacted more assets worldwide than sort of the two largest malwares.
It's frightening. And the other aspect that's frightening to this is the rollback process.
Yeah.
There was no rollback process.
So Dave, is there a way to, architect some sort of automation here or some sort of network architecture here so if it does happen, it's not so manual? Is there something that can be put in place here?
Yeah, not necessarily for this one. I have seen some pretty clever solutions come up. I guess from the virtual world, it wasn't that hard to roll back. A lot of people are going to have good site recovery management. If we need to roll a VM back a couple of hours, we can roll a VM back a couple of hours. Worst comes to worst, we have to shut it down, go into safe mode. Again, it's a virtualized environment. A couple of hands on deck are going to be able to do a fair few servers. What really impacted a lot of clients is more where it's impacted, again, we're a work from home culture these days. It's impacted Bob's laptop and Bob lives out bush. Sort of helping him get that endpoint back online, especially where we are dealing with sort of enterprise customers with enterprise software. They've got BitLocker. They've made sure that, they've either secured their BIOS so you can't even get into safe mode. If you can get into safe mode, then, we do need the BitLocker key. They're not small strings to read over the phone to an end user.
Oh.
We've also got to get into our AD that also might be down because it had CrowdStrike. So the impact throughout the chain was quite heavy. That said, sort of was reading an article around using a barcode reader to then produce barcodes to then inject them into laptops to be able to type them out, and sort of automating that process to be able to quickly regain access. But again, it's a lot of hands on deck. It's a lot of hands on keyboards to rectify this issue for the endpoint fleet.
All right. So let's say, okay, so we've got, if you are CrowdStrike, consider your options. Given that this is the second one, it's going to be hard to defend, really, I would think, particularly to a CFO or a CEO, Tom. CrowdStrike are good. Can you imagine the IT guy? No, they're good, all right? Out, get them out. So it's going to be very, very difficult for CISOs and people who are, fanboys of CrowdStrike. It's going to be very challenging for them.
And the thing is, it's not like the old days where CrowdStrike was like the only thing. It's like, no, you've got options. There's plenty of options. Yeah. That's not a problem. You can swap them out.
Yeah, and we've mentioned a couple of them. So what about things like tabletop exercises, David, recovery plans, role play, those sorts of things? Are those sorts of things that businesses and IT leaders need to be considering?
Exactly it. And I think, the day and age that we're in, we're very reliant on our technology infrastructure. But, we saw it quite a lot. And I kind of get it from, the Coles Myer Group side of things. If the servo's down, if Kmart's down, we're not going to go to pen and paper for those type of environments. But for the smaller environments, we found that they were also crippled as well. So having that business continuity where we can go back to, if it's pen and paper, if it's going back to basic sort of whiteboarding, just to make sure that we do have that business continuity. So, if we are looking at what happens when all of our endpoints are ransomware or crypto locked, it's going to have the same effect as if, another software update comes out for a different platform or CrowdStrike again and makes our machines shut down. We're losing those endpoints and we need to know how to do business without those endpoints. I think, we saw really good disaster recovery from the server layer and the virtualization layer. Unless you were a Hyper-V customer and you had CrowdStrike on your Hyper-V server, there was a few issues that came up from that as well. And I think realistically, it's coming down to BCP. It's coming down to knowing who your third parties are and what the impacts might be from those third parties. Typically, if we look at something like the LastPass data breach, we're looking at them going, okay, cool. Well, if we put all of our passwords in a vault, what happens if that vault was compromised? Do we have offline copies of that vault? So we learn from that and we move forward from that. This now shows us we need to be conscious of what's on our endpoint and what permissions the software on our endpoints actually have. That then leads into the tabletop exercises. We can look at, if it is CrowdStrike or it is another sort of vulnerability management suite that's installed. If that was to have an issue and to cause an interruption, what is the impact of that interruption? And how do we actually handle that from a business perspective? How are we communicating and running our PR as well? So I think tabletop exercises become more important. I think, traditionally we see tabletop exercises in the SMB market for people to go, one of our competitors have had an issue. We want to make sure we don't have that issue. Or our cyber insurance says that we have to do these exercises, so we should do them too. I think with 1% of Windows machines being impacted, everyone is highly aware of the CrowdStrike outage. It should really lead to, questioning what do we do if we were in this situation, if you weren't already in that situation.
Well, I think it shows how fragile, and how IT dependent we are. If you think, you start thinking about AI, right? Geez, putting bots out there and, we're in their hands, we're pretty... You know what I mean? It's very fragile. I think, we all need to have a good think about what we're doing.
Can I add to that, David, to your points there, which are really good? I think there is an element of understanding your vendors. So just taking that stream you mentioned before, saying, right, what vendors push out software on a regular basis, or and what processes do my vendors follow when they push out patches? Of those vendors, which ones are actually impacting the kernel or other dangerous elements? It might be the kernel in this case, but it could be your critical database or a critical application or something like that. What vendors are pushing out patches under some sort of, okay, I've got to get a patch out, security related patch, just got to go. And then of those vendors, what processes are they following? Are they just blindly doing what CrowdStrike is, smashing stuff out without anyone knowing? Or are they actually, have they got processes in around, security, like testing processes or small release type windows and blah, 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 blah. So I think that, for my mind, that was a real opener. We've got vendors in our mix who just pumping out patches all the time. We all know it happens. And we all kind of go, oh, well, that's okay. They know what they're doing. The truth is they don't. And I don't think we can sit back and say, oh, they're trusted. They're fine. They're Microsoft. They're security people. They know what they're doing. And I know a guy at the pointy end of NAB who was saying, they don't know what they're doing. And they might have known what they were doing a year ago, but then a whole bunch of new people have come in and they don't follow the same process. So this, for my mind, that is the number one thing people should be doing. Review your vendors, review their patch processes, and really understand the impact of those releases on your environment.
And have some sort of mitigation strategy.
Yes, and then
don't be a victim. Don't be a victim. Have a mitigation strategy.
Understand when this happens to you. What are you going to do about it? It's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes to mind is that, do you remember the SolarWinds incident a while ago? Where SolarWinds had the hackers got in, right, and then they pushed the release out, and then they pushed the button like that. Like, bloody hell, how close to world destruction would be if the hackers did this?
Yeah, that was third-party risk management. So, Dave, any other advice? I think we've covered quite a bit of ground there on what people could do. But I think if people out there, are in this situation, want to have a chat with us, Dave, they can reach out to you, me, and we'd obviously be, happy to help. Any commentary there?
Yeah, and I think, more than happy to come in, talk around, what we can look at from a BCP point of view, what we can look at third-party supplier risks as well. And, to Tom's point, it's not the first time we're seeing third-party supplier risks come through. It's just the first time that it's really impacted more of the world at this stage. So realistically, we're going to see it again if it's a security issue or if it's a sort of software development lifecycle issue. Things like this will continue to happen. So it's more about being prepared, as Josh said, not being the victim, but actually having your sort of ducks in a row and making sure that you can, when these happen, and get onto the early warning signs of them.
Yeah, we can get up. So Dave, what else are you seeing out there in the cyber? They've got you in here. It's been a while. So what's happening in the world of cyber besides this?
Yeah, look, I think kind of at the front of the show, we promised we wouldn't talk AI, but it's AI. It always is at the moment. So most definitely we're seeing a sort of large amount of data governance coming into play. So kind of getting AI ready, understanding that, we've got a lot of information within our data repositories, where we have it and what we have it and where it's going to be utilized. So talking with a lot of clients at the moment and working through just sort of a lot of information protection, information classification and DLP. Outside of that, sort of coming back to the private access as well, sort of a lot of discussions and a lot of movement around private access, sort of looking to, VPNs have been dead for a while, but really start trying to move away from VPNs, get into a lot more of that ZTNA sort of security posture as well.
And now Microsoft have a good option. And the other thing, I think I know we're doing a lot of Essential 8 work, David, at the moment, assessments, remediations.
The turn of the financial year, so it's a good time to really get a snapshot of where you are. Ideally, you also did an Essential 8 audit last year, so you can really see how effective that your sort of budget and spend has been over the last financial year. Essential 8 did their update in November last year as well, so there's been quite a lot of change, and we're seeing a lot of clients that were sort of in that maturity 1-2 perspective starting to slip back to even the 0s and 1s now as well. So really good time to sort of, work out what projects you have coming up, where they're going to align. Make sure that as you're starting to architect those solutions as well, they're really going to close out the gaps in your cybersecurity posture from an Essential 8 point of view.
Very good.
Yeah, good. All right, Tom, Longview, you're still doing some cool AI stuff out there.
Yeah, well, we'll talk more about AI in our upcoming podcast, I think. But yeah, it's interesting you say about AI and data loss prevention. AI to determine what data you've got in your network, because it seems to be a really interesting and really, really useful use case. But before AI came along, people had to go and check every bloody document in every work directory, right? And they made mistakes. Now you can turn AI into that world to understand, right, can you identify where your passport pictures are, or his driver's license numbers are? Well, that seems to be a really interesting use case, actually.
Exactly. And, it's interesting. We are using AI to protect us from AI.
Yeah. Oh, what could go wrong, David?
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. And Tom, we won't talk about Richmond and the Tigers or Hawthorn.
No? Yeah. Oh, you're back, are you? Oh, the Hawks are back. Look at him. He wants to talk about football now, does he?
Yeah.
Right. You haven't said anything for 3 years, and now you want to talk footy.
Well, come on. That's
Mate,
that's
Hawks are looking awesome. They are looking fantastic.
We are looking good. It's good that we're back. So Dave, if people want to get in touch, what's the best way if people want to reach out and have a chat to you about any of these topics we've talked about today?
Yeah, most definitely. So best would probably be either find me on LinkedIn, so David Stevenson at Empyrean. Otherwise, feel free to send through an email to dstevenson, STEVENSON, at empyreanit.com.au.
Great. It's been great having you on, Tom, as always. And thank you, everyone out there, for joining us, listening. Or I have heard some people say they really like it on YouTube. So I wouldn't have thought. But no, we do. We appreciate you, sticking with us. We're 4 years plus in, so we're still enjoying it. So thank you very much, and take care out there. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Cheers.